I am not in the habit of issuing trigger warnings, but I must warn the House in this case that this speech covers deeply distressing events. I will discuss allegations of a grave miscarriage of justice. Lucy Letby was convicted of murdering 7 infants and attempting to murder 7 more. She received multiple concurrent full life sentences. It seemed clear. A nurse had turned into a serial killer. But then I was approached by many experts, leading statisticians, neonatal specialists, forensic scientists, legal experts, and those who had served at Chester Hospital who were afraid to come forward. They were all concerned by what they perceived as false analyses and diagnoses used to persuade a lay jury to convict Letby. The County of Chester Hospital neonatal unit suffered a sharp increase in deaths from a typical 2 to 4 a year to 17 in one 13-month period. When the hospital senior management became aware of the elevated mortality in June 2016, it was alarmed and commissioned some investigations. Their report noted many failings on the unit, all of which, at least in part, if not in total, could have been the cause of these deaths. The report highlighted inadequate staffing levels, delayed escalation of concerns to tertiary units, and, I quote, disconnect between the neonatal leadership and the trust governance and risk management processes. In essence, because of a mixture of inadequate resources and poor medical management, the hospital was not capable of keeping these very fragile babies alive. A fact recognized, actually, by the hospital when the neonatal unit was downgraded in July 2016 and stopped taking babies of less than 32 weeks gestation. The report, offering a completely different reasons for the deaths, was never shown to the jury. Some consultants in this case, in the course of this, had attempted to blame Letby for these deaths, and a redacted section of the report states, and I quote, "The consultants explained their allegations were based on Nurse Letby being on shift on each occasion an infant died, although not necessarily caring for the infant, combined with, quotes, gut feeling, close quotes. There's no other evidence or history to link Nurse Letby to the deaths, and her colleagues have expressed no concerns about her practice." Again, this section was never shown to the jury. These consultants then persuaded the management to call the police in April 2017. There was no hard evidence against Letby. Nobody saw her do anything untoward. The doctor's gut feeling was based on a coincidence. She was on shift for a number of deaths. Around this time, the hospital was struggling with another problem, possibly a more sensible explanation for this sudden increase in deaths. Leaked reports showed the hospital, specifically the neonatal unit, battled a Pseudomonas aeruginosa infection for months. This antibiotic-resistant bug posed a serious risk to babies. The mortality rate for Pseudomonas ranges from 14.5% to 50% in children, and over 55% for cases involving extremely low birth weight infants like these. Again, the jury never knew about this contamination. In April 2018, an officer on the investigation approached a leading statistician, Professor Jane Hutton, and asked her to put a figure on the likelihood of a nurse being on duty, quotes, during all the deaths and collapses, close quotes, in the unit. Of course, this is a false proposition, as Letby was not on duty for anything like all the deaths, as we'll see later, but that was glossed over at the trial. That notwithstanding, Professor Hutton informed the police that any proper statistical inquiry should not concentrate on one member from the outset. Instead, it required full, proper research into all possible explanations for any increase in babies collapsing, including their medical conditions and prematurity, as well as the broader performance of the unit. In 2021, after Letby had been charged, the police wrote an email to Professor Hutton, and I quote it in terms, "We have had a further meeting this afternoon where we have informed the prosecutors we were looking into the validity of the statistical evidence in this case. The prosecutor has instructed us not to pursue this avenue any further at present." Now, this appears to be in direct contravention of the Code for Crown Prosecutors, specifically Part 3.3 of the Code, prosecutors cannot direct the police or any other investigators. Again, the jury was never informed of Professor Hutton's explicit advice to the police that their statistical approach was flawed. Now, this matters enormously because the most powerfully influential piece of evidence in the case was the prosecution KC showing a table with Letby listed as the only nurse on duty for all of the alleged murders and inflicted injuries. Professor Hutton, who has reviewed the case extensively, believes that deeply flawed statistical evidence was used, and she has said that statistical errors are, and I quote, similar to those in the Sally Clark case, but worse. Which brings us to the actual cases and causes of the deaths. Two expert neonatologists, consultant working neonatologists, are working through the cases to establish the actual causes of the baby's deterioration and deaths. So far, they have completed two detailed case reviews, baby O and C. Now, in the case of baby O, the prosecution claimed the baby was attacked with blunt trauma to the liver and had air injected into the nasogastric tube. The case notes tell a different story, showing how the doctors used excessive ventilation pressure during resuscitation, which overinflated the baby's lungs and prevented blood from flowing back to the lungs. This caused the baby to desaturate its blood oxygen level repeatedly. The medical team responded by increasing the pressures even more, initiating a downward spiral in the baby's condition. The overinflation of the baby's lungs forced the diaphragm downwards, pushing the liver into the baby's abdominal cavity. The consultant in charge took a decision to insert a needle into the abdomen to release what they thought was pressure in the abdomen, gas pressure in the abdomen. However, this was wrongly inserted into the right side of the baby's abdomen. As a result of this error, the needle penetrated the liver, causing serious internal bleeding. This is undoubtedly a significant contributory factor in the baby's death, if not the outright cause. The report states, and I quote, "The deterioration was predictable and his death was avoidable and resulted from suboptimal care." Suboptimal care. The author of that suboptimal care, the doctor who inserted the needle into the liver, was one of the principal accusers of Lucy Letby in the trial. This directly contradicts the prosecution's portrayal of events. The trauma to the liver was caused by a serious error by one of the consultants who led the accusations against Letby. The experts also stated there's no air in the gut in excess of what would be expected for a baby in these circumstances. None of this was made clear to the jury either. In the case of baby C, the prosecution claimed this was a healthy baby, killed by air being injected into his stomach. The case notes on baby C demonstrate this baby was actually profoundly unwell before birth. The baby suffered from severe fetal growth restriction. This meant the baby had to be delivered by caesarean section. Within an hour of birth, he developed respiratory distress. To treat the respiratory problems, they tried to deliver surfactant, a mixture that helps baby's lungs expand better, open up, down an endotracheal tube. The case notes, however, show that the doctor pushed the tube too far in, pushing it into one lung, where the other lung was left collapsed. In the days after the baby's birth, he showed several signs of abdominal obstruction, including the vomiting of bile, and he never opened his bowels since birth, which the doctor in charge did not recognize or diagnose. The report concludes by stating this baby died of natural causes compounded by suboptimal medical care. This again directly contradicts the prosecution's narrative of deliberate harm. However's diagnosis claimed the baby had air injected in the stomach, so he could no longer breathe. This was predicated on an X-ray showing an unusual amount of air in the stomach. It's become clear that Letby was not even at the hospital when the X-ray was taken, nor has he been at any point till then since the baby C's birth 2 days earlier. Again, the doctor responsible for these errors was another one of those who made accusations against Lucy Letby. And again, none of this was made clear to the jury.
What he says is deeply troubling and distressing on so many different levels. I would just like to ask him whether his conclusion is that there is some case in justice to consider this an unsafe verdict.
There is case in justice, in my view, for a retrial, but there is a technical problem. There is a problem. One of the problems we face is that much of the evidence was available at the time. I mean, what I have described is an expert analysis of the case notes which were there at the time, but it was simply not presented to the jury. This means the Court of Appeal can dismiss it, basically saying the defence should have presented it at the initial trial. It is in essence saying, if your defence team weren't good enough to present this evidence, hard luck, you stay banged up for life. Now, that may be judicially convenient, but it's not justice. This has been a historic problem in Britain, delaying the resolution of a number of miscarriage of justice cases.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I thank the Honourable Member for Goole and Pockington for bringing this debate this evening. It is an important principle of the rule of law that the government does not interfere with judicial decisions. In this case, the Court of Appeal have carefully considered the arguments put before them and delivered their judgment. Given this and the ongoing police investigations, it would be inappropriate for me to comment on Ms Letby's case specifically.